What if I told you there's a part of Jesus' life the Bible doesn't tell you about? A gap so vast it covers almost 2 decades of silence? From the moment he confounded the elders in the temple at age 12 until the day he stepped into the Jordan River to begin his ministry, 18 years vanish into mystery. No sermons, no miracles, no written trace. For centuries, believers and scholars have asked the same question: where was Jesus? And what was he doing during those missing years? Most churches say he simply lived quietly in Nazareth, a humble carpenter waiting for his time to come. But what if that isn't the full story? What if, far from the deserts of Judea, Jesus' footsteps reached places no one ever imagined, across the sands of Egypt, through the temples of India, even into the misty mountains of Tibet? Because deep within the highlands of Ethiopia, there exists a version of Christianity untouched by Rome's influence, ancient, unbroken, and astonishingly detailed. Their Bible contains 81 books, far more than the Western canon, and within its sacred pages lie stories that the rest of the world has never heard. These are not fairy tales, they are holy text, read, sung, and revered for centuries in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And they speak of a Jesus who didn't simply wait for his destiny, but who lived it long before anyone called him Messiah. According to these ancient writings, like the infancy Gospel of Thomas and the Book of the Cock, Jesus, even as a child, wielded divine power. He gave life to clay birds with a single breath. He healed the wounded, he raised the dead, and he spoke words of such wisdom that even scholars fell silent before him. To Western ears, these stories sound unbelievable, impossible. But what if the unbelievable is exactly what makes them divine? Because in Ethiopia, these missing years are not seen as a blank page in history, they're seen as the hidden beginning of salvation itself. Imagine for a moment that the Son of God did not discover his purpose at 30 to come, but that he always knew. Imagine a young Jesus walking through deserts, crossing seas, speaking with mystics and sages, not to learn their truths, but to awaken theirs. A universal Christ, unbound by geography, tradition, or empire. So why don't we read about this Jesus in the Western Bible? Why did the councils of the early church, Nicaea, Hippo, Carthage, leave out these ancient accounts? Were they too mystical, too challenging, or simply too revealing? In today's video, we'll uncover what Ethiopia preserved when the rest of the world forgot, the stories that bridge the silence of Jesus' youth, and the truth they might hold about who he really was. Because maybe those 18 missing years aren't missing at all. Maybe they were never lost, only hidden, waiting for the world to be ready to listen. When the Gospels fall silent, Ethiopia begins to speak, and what it says is extraordinary. According to the infancy Gospel of Thomas, Jesus' divine awareness didn't suddenly ignite at age 30. It was already burning in him as a child. At 5 years old, he played by a river, molding small birds from clay. When a man accused him of working on the Sabbath and reported him to Joseph, the child simply clapped his hands and the birds took flight. To Western ears, that sounds like myth, but to Ethiopian Christians, it's theology in motion, a child revealing divine power through play. This wasn't Jesus learning to be holy. It was holiness revealing itself through innocence. The same text describes him healing a boy who fell from a roof, raising another from the dead, and silencing the arrogant. He purifies poisoned water with a touch, bringing life where death should have ruled. Every act is symbolic: water renewed, air filled with flight, life restored. In the West, these stories are often dismissed as legend, but in Ethiopia, they're a declaration. The Son of God never had to become divine. He always was. Yet Ethiopia's tradition doesn't stop at miracles. It tells us that Jesus, during those 18 unrecorded years, didn't remain hidden in a carpenter's home. He walked the world. Ancient apocryphal texts and oral legends preserved in the East describe a young man who journeyed far beyond Galilee. He traveled through Egypt, where mystics and priests recognized his radiance. He walked across Persia, through India, and even into Tibet, meeting sages and seekers of the divine. Some historians dismiss this as mythic exaggeration, but others note striking parallels. In India, Buddhist monks spoke of a teacher named Isha, a holy man from the West who preached compassion, forgiveness, and purity of heart. In Persian lore, there are tales of a radiant traveler who healed the sick and taught mercy above sacrifice. Did Jesus learn from these cultures, or were they learning from him? The Ethiopian church teaches that he didn't borrow wisdom from the East. He recognized it. Truth is truth, wherever it's found. His encounters weren't about absorbing human teachings. They were divine reflections meeting one another across civilizations. That's why, centuries later, his words, "Love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. Store up treasures in heaven," resonate with ideas found in Hindu, Buddhist, and Egyptian mysticism. But instead of suggesting imitation, the Ethiopian interpretation says something far more profound. Christ was the eternal word, present everywhere truth existed. In the Western Canon, the story of Jesus begins with Bethlehem. In the Ethiopian Canon, it begins before time. The ascension of Isaiah, preserved in the Ethiopian Bible, portrays a vision where the prophet Isaiah sees the sun descending through 7 heavens, taking on human form not as a mortal gaining divinity, but as divinity willingly entering flesh. This is not a story of discovery, it's a mission of descent. It tells us that Jesus was not chosen at baptism. He came with purpose from eternity itself. In Ethiopian hymns, he is called the Ancient of Days made flesh. Their icons show him as a child holding a scroll, not a toy, but a symbol of perfect wisdom already written in his being. In their liturgy, they proclaim that, even as a toddler, he knew his Father's will for them. Christmas isn't about a baby becoming God, it's about God humbling himself into childhood. So why did these stories disappear from Western Bibles? When Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, it faced an unexpected problem: diversity. Too many texts, too many voices, too many versions of the same faith. Church councils were called Nicaea, Hippo, Carthage, to define a single Orthodox canon. Many writings were discarded, not necessarily because they were false, but because they were too mystical, too local, or too uncomfortable for an empire seeking unity. Ethiopia, however, stood apart. Its conversion to Christianity came not through Rome, but through a royal envoy connected to the earliest apostles. It didn't attend Roman councils. It didn't edit its Bible to fit imperial politics. It kept its faith in Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic tongue older than Latin itself. While Rome looked outward, Ethiopia looked upward, preserving a vision of Jesus untouched by empire. What emerges from the Ethiopian scriptures is a Jesus both deeply personal and profoundly global. A child who gives life to clay, a youth who heals with a touch, a traveler who speaks to seekers of every nation, a divine being who steps willingly into human frailty. In this image, Jesus is not the property of any church or creed. He's the heartbeat of creation itself, the divine word walking through every culture, whispering truth in every language. It's a Christ who doesn't belong to one tradition, but fulfills them all. And maybe that's what frightened the early church councils most, because a universal Christ can't be contained. He's bigger than politics, beyond borders, and unconstrained by doctrine. To Ethiopian believers, that universality doesn't weaken Christianity, it completes it. It means that every act of compassion, every honest search for truth, every attempt to bring peace is part of Christ's story. Today, Ethiopian churches still echo with hymns celebrating the divine child who shaped birds from clay. Their icons shimmer with gold and crimson, their chants rising like ancient rivers of sound. Monks still copy the same manuscripts that Western history forgot. They see no conflict between miracle and mystery because, for them, mystery is the language of God. And through those texts, a message shines. The missing years were never empty. They were preparation, revelation, the unfolding of divine purpose long before the world was ready to see it. That's why, for Ethiopian Christians, Jesus didn't become the Son of God. He simply revealed who he had always been. When you put all of this together, the miracles, the travels, the divine awareness from birth, a new image of Jesus begins to emerge. Not a quiet figure waiting for destiny to find him, but a radiant being shaping the world long before history began to take note. For centuries, Western Christianity treated those 18 years as silence, as if God himself had pressed pause. But the Ethiopian tradition whispers a different truth. There was no silence at all. While the Roman world built its empire and its theology, the hills and monasteries of Ethiopia kept alive a deeper story, a story where every breath, every act of kindness, every word of the young Jesus already carried the fullness of God's plan. When he breathed life into clay birds, it wasn't a child's trick. It was a sign that creation itself still listens to its maker. When he healed with a touch, it wasn't practice for future miracles. It was the same love that would one day raise Lazarus and conquer death itself. And when he wandered across lands and cultures, it wasn't curiosity, it was divine outreach, a reminder that truth isn't owned by one people, one language, or one nation. The Jesus of Ethiopia shows us something the modern world desperately needs to remember. Faith doesn't shrink when mystery expands. It grows. In our time, we often divide faith by geography, East and West, Catholic and Protestant, Orthodox and Reform. But when you look at these Ethiopian texts, something remarkable happens. The borders fade, the labels blur, and Jesus becomes what he was always meant to be. The bridge between heaven and earth, between humanity and divinity, between all who seek the light. Ethiopia's gospel doesn't compete with the Western one, it completes it. Where the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John give us the story of redemption, Ethiopia gives us the story of revelation, the ongoing awareness of divine life present even in childhood, even in play, even in wonder. It invites us to see the Son of God not only as the crucified Savior, but as the laughing child, the young traveler, the eternal Word walking the earth before anyone recognized him. Because today, more than ever, faith is starving for awe. We live in an age of explanations, where miracles are reduced to metaphors, and mysteries are edited out for convenience. But the Ethiopian perspective reminds us that the divine is not meant to be domesticated. It's meant to astonish. It tells us that Jesus' life wasn't small, predictable, or limited by what we know. He was and is the living mystery of God, a mystery that invites us, not to solve him, but to seek him. Maybe that's why these stories endured. Not because they answer every question, but because they awaken better ones. Questions that stir the soul. What if the Christ who walked on water also walked among monks in faraway lands? What if his message was never meant to be owned, but shared, a song echoing through every human heart willing to listen? In the end, the missing years are really a mirror. They show us how much of Christ we still fail to see. Maybe that's why God allowed silence in the Bible, so that each generation would search for him anew, not just in pages, but in wonder. The Ethiopian texts remind us there are always more stories waiting beyond the familiar verses, more mysteries whispering through forgotten mountains and old languages. And in each of them, the same truth resounds, that the Word became flesh, not once, but for all time, in every place where hearts awaken to his presence. So the question now isn't where Jesus was during those years, it's where is he now in your life, in your questions, in your search for meaning? Because maybe the greatest discovery isn't that the missing years were found in Ethiopia, but that through them, we might find the missing wonder within ourselves. So as you finish this video, take a moment, not to argue, but to imagine. Imagine the child who shaped clay birds into flight. Imagine the young man crossing deserts and mountains, speaking truth in every tongue. And imagine that same Spirit still walking beside you, in your silence, your seeking, your ordinary days. The missing years of Jesus were never lost. They were waiting for hearts ready to believe again.